Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. You have joined for the Wellbeing Lead webinar, which is looking at tools to create a culture of wellbeing at work. My name's Claire Martin. I can see lots of familiar faces in the attendees. Some people I've met in person and lots of you through LinkedIn. So thank you for joining me live. It's always lovely to have people here to chat and react and ask questions as we go through this session. The goal is for it to last an hour, and I do want it to be interactive. The main option for that is the chat box. There's also little emoji reactions as well, which is often quite fun and gives me some reassurance that what I'm covering is working and making sense for you. So please do that. And start by perhaps just putting in the chat box where you're based, just so we get a little feel for where people are around the world and who's joining us live today. So I'm based in North Wales. I describe myself as a psychological coach. My background is all psychology, I suppose. I spend a lot of time researching and also training and supporting people one-to-one and in group settings around wellbeing in the workplace. So it's a passion of mine. I'm hoping to share some of that passion, insights and tools with you today. So the key focus really is the idea that in your roles, you perhaps are finding yourself in a lead role. So there's a little slide there of who I am. If you're not connected with me on LinkedIn, please feel free to scan the QR code there, and you can find my profile and connect with me, because I do share lots more things around wellbeing for leaders to support themselves, but also to support other people. And that, as I say, is going to be the focus of today, that I really want to give you that option to learn, so build, I guess, a strategy and confidence on how you're going to support other people. Parceled into that, of course, is going to be a little piece about how you support yourself, because that's equally important if you're going to look after other people. So the first question I've got for you is really, what would you like for this session? You've given up an hour of your time today to come and listen to this webinar. So just put into the chat box what you would like today. I can see Lorraine said that she's London home. My teams are in India, in Philippines, and the Falklands, and across Europe. So amazing. Thank you for joining us today, Lorraine. So please, if you're with us live, put into the chat box where you're based and maybe what you would like from today's session. It's really helpful for me to get a little feel for what people are looking for. I've obviously got some content I want to cover, but I can guide that in what I say and how I describe and perhaps answer questions. So please, if you're live with us today, just put in the chat box where you are and what you would like from this session. Okay, so just to give you an overview of what the focus is for this session, I'm going to give you, I hope, provide you some really useful, actionable information, practical steps to think, okay, well, what's next? What could I do now? And so from this webinar, I hope it leaves you with that next step, really useful techniques. I'm also going to tell you, for some of you who will be interested to know, that I'm running a very specific wellbeing lead course in the new year. So I'm going to give you a bit more information about that. And I want to create time at the end for any questions that might have come up throughout the session, or anything you have sort of by the end, specifically, perhaps around the course or anything else. So please keep the interaction coming in the chat box, and I will try and notice questions as we go along. If not, I will make time to pick them up at the end. Lovely. Sarah is joining us from Edinburgh. She's looking to be able to spot signs of mental health issues and how to encourage wellbeing with colleagues and family. Yeah, I love that, Sarah. Thank you. Yeah, it's not just about colleagues, is it? Because at home, if we are not well or our family are not well, it also impacts our work life. So, we are whole people. So I really like that. We've got Sam in Glasgow looking to review current practices, see if there's anything to improve across the company. Carol, my first Christmas with a new business. Oh, lovely. 3 offices. Wow. Community engagement officer for a care provider. Someone from Shropshire, Clara's from Shropshire. Wanting some useful techniques for wellbeing, mental health. Fantastic. And Ross Worthington. Hi, Ross. I feel you're my most local person, probably. Small team, mostly remote. So that's, can be a real challenge. But if you've got a workforce spread broader, I can appreciate there's a lot of people to support them with their mental health and wellbeing. And then we've got someone else in Wales. So Darren, welcome. A long way from me still. I'm up in Snowdonia, but yes, Wales still. Thank you for giving me that. It does give me a little bit of an idea of what's going on and where you're from. So the kind of first thing I want to go into is to give you an overview of what it might look like to really have a whole organizational approach to looking after well-being in your organization. What I find when I go in and I work with different clients is that quite often the person who is sort of maybe not officially called wellbeing lead, but sort of has become the wellbeing lead, essentially is taking on that role, whether they've got a background specifically in it or not. This suddenly, it's often an add-on to the rest of their job, right? And a lot of people are not in a position where they've got vast amounts of time to do the research and knowledge around it, and perhaps don't have a psychology background or sort of a mental health background. So what I'm hoping is that this process today is going to be the beginnings of you to go, okay, what are the things that I need? And so for me, very much the first thing is this strategy of thinking about where you're at. And some of you have said that, like looking at what's going on and what could be improved. The second part I want to focus on is this idea of like making it successful. If you're going to implement a well-being strategy in your workplace, you of course want it to have impact, because otherwise it's a lot of time and energy and often money that can feel like, was it just a tick box? And for me, this is what I do all the time. This is my main passion, my main work. It just feels so important that people see that there is more to it than that we can create something that is lasting, but that also comes from a really concrete evidence base. And so my background is in positive psychology. And I did my undergrad in psychology and then went on to do my master's in applied positive psychology. And I'm constantly kind of keeping my mind in that arena and looking at what's current and what's new research to support well-being, and specifically well-being and performance in the workplace, because those two things come together as really key when we're looking at sort of an organizational approach to this. So I'm going to kind of cover that and sort of bring in the idea that we need these evidence-based tools, and suggest some that are relevant. And then the third part of today, I'm going to talk about this very relevant piece, which is sustaining the change. Because you might introduce something, and people, I know if you introduce it really well, people get quite excited about it. Often I get brought in and I'll do just an hour workshop or a half-day workshop. And I hope, usually, I manage to create a bit of a buzz, and people are like, oh my God, that was so useful, that was so exciting, I'm definitely going to do that. And they keep it up for a week, maybe a little longer. But like most of us, rest of life comes in and takes over, and rest of work comes in and takes over. So there's a really key piece here, and I want to cover today, is on how are you going to sustain the change? What does maintenance look like? And I'll explore that in more depth and sort of guide you of options, things to think about. So I hear this stuff all the time, and I don't know if you hear this as well in your roles, perhaps in leadership or in management, or perhaps you're saying these things to yourself. But what I hear often when I run training are things like, I wake up in the middle of the night and my mind is racing. So we've probably all experienced this, but if it's happening every night, it starts to impact the quality of our sleep, the amount of sleep. The next day we don't feel good. People are saying things like they can't switch off from work. For me, the key word is they can't. What's the reason? I would want to know, what's the reason behind that? People are talking about work-life balance and joking. And so they, what's that? How does that fit in? That's just hilarious. I mean, some people question that whether we should have a balance, and we could go into that. It's probably a whole nother webinar on how we define work-life balance. But I think most of us understand that concept, that a lot of people feel that it's all work and they don't know how to fit anything else in, or they get overwhelmed and it feels like they can't. So this concept, that word overwhelmed gets used. I ran a webinar yesterday, and I used a sort of a word cloud feature where the most dominant word came up, and overwhelm, when I asked them what stress meant to them, was one of the key words. So a lot of people get into this state and they don't really know how to get out of it. They might love their job. They'll say, I love what I do, but I'm just so tired. And you see this across all levels in an organization, from CEOs right the way through to all of the people at all levels. And, when I hear this stuff, I'm like, oh, we need to do something about this. Yeah. Darren's just said work-life integration. And it's true, right? We need to find some way of integrating all the things that matter to us into our life so that we are not at that point where we could burn out. And for me, I guess that's what fires me up, and that's what makes me want to do it. And I'm imagining, as people who've chosen to come to this webinar, to listen to this webinar, you do hear a lot of this kind of thing. I can see Carol put 100% into the chat box, so I'm sure you can relate to some of this. The other thing I see a lot is why things don't work. And as a provider of wellbeing training and coaching, I want it to work. That's really important to me. There's no point doing it if it doesn't have an impact. But what I see all the time is that people don't have some kind of wellbeing strategy. That they have often a mental health policy, because it's something that they know is important, they recognize it, but they're not making that distinction. So because they're not making a distinction between well-being and mental health, there's often just like, oh, we'll do a quick little well-being thing, as though we can just plaster over all the problems. And sometimes those problems are, for an individual, a mental health challenge that maybe does need support, but also sometimes they're actually problems from an organizational point of view, the way things are being structured, and we're not questioning and looking at it. Other times it's, as an individual, they could just do with a more proactive approach rather than at crisis, now we try and use some wellbeing strategies. And the other thing that I see a lot is the reason wellbeing strategies don't work, or wellbeing initiatives don't work, is because people in the organization, they feel like, this might not be true, but they feel like they don't have time to engage with it. That if they did that, that hour would be an hour out of work, and now there's more build-up of work in their inbox, and that's just more stressful. That feels like overwhelm magnified. So that then when we look at it, and I'm going to talk about this, a kind of strategy, that whole organizational approach, we have to zoom out and say, what's the reason people aren't engaging? Is it because the initiatives are boring and nobody wants to go to them? That might be one reason. But I've also been into organizations where I could have been training 20 to 40 people, and 8 people have turned up. And those 8 people have told me that it's because some people either were fearful if they turned up to the session, it looked like they weren't coping, or they felt by turning up, they would struggle to cope. So these kind of things are the reasons often why we see things not working. The other thing is, I've sort of mentioned this already, only introduce when people are struggling. I'm not saying it's too late, but my ideal would be it would be introduced much earlier. And the other thing is that leaders don't role model. So if you are in a leadership position, maybe you are. I mean, I'm probably preaching to the converted if you showed up to my webinar, but it's tough. In a leadership role, often you are in that position where you're busy, and maybe you're feeling a bit overwhelmed right now. And so you end up prioritizing work over other things. You stay later, you send the emails later in the day. Could be all sorts of things that your people are noticing and seeing. So just put in the chat box now. I don't know if you relate to any of those, where you've maybe tried things before and it just hasn't worked, or they're almost your concerns of putting your all into a wellbeing initiative, but actually you don't believe it's going to work because one of these things. Just put the number in, 1 to 5, maybe it's all, maybe all of those, or 2, 3, whichever one you think resonates with you. I'm just interested to hear from you if any of those resonate with you. So Darren said number 3 for sure. So people think they don't have time to engage. Yeah, and that could be a really big challenge. Clara's the same, number 3. Danielle, number 4, not reacting quick enough to signs. Yeah, and it's hard because people don't often tell you they need help. And that's why if we can have this proactive strategy, we're doing it when we don't need it. So that when we do, these things are already habits that can support us and get us through. Natalie said 2, Sam says 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, Lorraine, all of them. Ross Worthington, getting buying at 3 would be great, and for 4 for the broader team. Okay, so there's, with everybody who's on this call, I think all of those have been mentioned. So you're experiencing the same as I'm seeing when I'm working with clients. Now, that's not, to say we can't get past these. And obviously, my idea is that I can support you to combat these limitations that often arise. And the first step is recognizing them. It's like any coaching that you do with someone, one of the things you're going to say to them is what's stopping you. Like you set out the goal, but then you say, what's going to stop you? Because if we don't know what's going to stop us achieving our goal, it's going to catch us out. Like it just will. That's life. But if we can stop, notice, reflect, question, and plan around that, then we've got a chance. So why would you focus on your own well-being? Okay, that question is highly relevant, because if you don't know why you don't focus on your own well-being, how can you expect your staff to do it? So the people that you're trying to support, even though you know it would be good for them or relevant for them, if we don't know personally why we would focus on our own well-being, then it's kind of hard to role model that. For me, I love it. Carol's just taking the words out of my mouth. I perform better when I do it. Like, literally, that's the truth, right? For most of us, we know it. Darren, we can't pour from an empty cup. It's so true. And if you've ever tried, I imagine you got to a very unhealthy place, either physically or mentally or both, to pour from an empty cup. If you are drained yourself and then you try to keep giving to someone else, it's very challenging. So this kind of fits with a model that comes from coaching psychology. And it is, I really like the sort of simplicity of it, but the recognition that well-being and performance are completely connected. Because in a workplace, performance matters. But also as an individual, when we perform at our best, when we are achieving, we feel good. So the two combine and are essential to recognize. So in this quadrant model, you'll see that there are two axes. So the vertical axis of high well-being and the horizontal axis of performance. So in the top right is described as thriving. Now, this is a space that my goal is to help people create organizations that thrive, because individuals within that organization are able to thrive. So we need to look after well-being and create opportunities for high performance. So people need to be stretched. If we're bored, we might well be looking after our well-being, but we're gonna move to that left-hand side where we're happy, yet we're disengaged. And if you've ever worked in a job where, there wasn't enough to do, or you weren't being stretched, you weren't kind of utilizing your strengths, you'll probably know what that felt like. You might have had all the time in the world to go to the gym or go out for a nice walk or make sure you looked after your health, spend time with friends and family in the evening, but there was like a piece missing. And that was that, yeah, I'm achieving, I'm doing something. If we allow our well-being to drop, and yet we stay trying to push our performance, you can see that quadrant at the bottom right is described as surviving. Now, a lot of people I speak to often find themselves in this place, that they are on the outside peak performance, right? That they are achieving everything that's set to them, they're getting it done. And to a high level quite often, but they are sacrificing their well-being to do it. And as a result, they're really just in a survival mode. And there is a limit to that. And if we don't focus on building tools around well-being, getting that individual to find the things that they need to support their well-being, they are likely to see a drop in performance. It might take a month, it might take 3 months, it might take a little longer, but you're going to see them move into the bottom left corner. Now, if anybody has ever experienced this, it's a really challenging place to be. The word there says struggling. Struggling can be serious mental health and physical health challenges. It can be being off work. So if somebody's in this space, they may need a variety of support, but helping them improve their well-being is absolutely going to support them to kind of move up into the top half of that quadrant, where we would say that they are moving into a space of thriving. So rather than kind of keep pushing that performance piece, we're going to want to create that balance of well-being and performance. The two are linked together. If we don't recognize that, we end up in a space of burnout. This model can be really nice just to kind of stop and reflect and note where you are. If you're willing to, you can put in the chat box where you might be. You might feel like you flip between all of them. You might feel that you're in a survival mode. I can see some people already mentioned that they're surviving. So thinking about yourself as well when I'm mentioning these things, but you can use it as a reflective tool with your staff. And it's something that is quite nice in a way, because they don't have to have the language particularly. You could just ask them to put an X in a box, which part of the quadrant, and they might put it in the middle somewhere, and that's fine. But often when people are not used to talking about their well-being and their mental health, they literally don't have the language for it. And so sometimes having a reflective tool where you could just get a piece of paper, it doesn't need to be all color-coded like this one, and just, an X on a piece of paper, and get them to put, where they're at in that space. So Sarah said, work is thriving, but home surviving. Okay, lovely point to bring up, Sarah, because actually in different parts of our life, we might find ourselves in different parts of that quadrant. So maybe your family life, your home life is in one mode, and work life's in another, but they impact each other. They take their toll still on us. So the goal, and what I want to focus on today, and my goal with all of my clients, is to help them avoid burnout, but not just avoid it. I want to focus on this proactive helping people to thrive, because if we can set our sights on that top right quadrant, then we are giving people proactive strategies to support themselves on the long term. Whereas if we're only maybe avoiding burnout or helping someone at the point of burnout, we're usually just addressing a mental health or physical health challenge. And although absolutely needed, and I hope that in your organizations you might, if your organization is large enough, you might have support for that. If not, of course, in the UK, certainly that's when your GP would be, the referral point. But, we're talking about well-being at work. We want to focus on being well. And part of that is moving to the space of thriving. This, from my kind of experience, I've done lots of one-to-one coaching with clients at all levels in organizations. I've done, training across the world. I've had some wonderful experiences this year in the Philippines and in India. I've worked with, a variety of different clients, from pharmaceutical companies through to universities. And it's amazing that the crossover is so similar in the things that challenge us and what we experience and the ways in which we can improve that. So my goal really is to share some of those insights with you, and you'll have a lot of knowledge and experience, I'm sure, yourselves, just in your roles, and you will know your people best. So what I hope is you can take some of the things I'm going to talk about and start to really apply them and make them relevant to you in your situation. So the strategy, a whole organizational approach. Now, I created a model which is designed to kind of represent this need for a whole organizational approach. It's called the Rest and Rise model. Rest and Rise is an acronym that I'm going to talk you through. It's represented in this model. Obviously, there's quite a lot going on there, so I'm going to break it down for you and kind of pull out, tease out what I mean by this whole organizational approach. But just at a glance, you can see in the color there, we've got the board, or the leadership team, who might be, depending on the structure, directors of your company, who are in a position to influence strategy. We've got leadership, who could be different tiers of managers within an organization, if your organization is large enough, team leaders, that kind of thing. And they have the power to support or not support certain initiatives, even if they don't do it vocally, but just in the way that they present it or role model. And then the team, your people, I need to come into that. And you'll see in the center there that I have it says Goldcrest Wellbeing Ambassadors. So one of the key things that I do in my work is I introduce wellbeing ambassadors into organizations alongside the leadership team to kind of create this whole organizational approach. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that and give you an insight, because it might be something you want to explore. So there's a kind of just pulling out, sort of remove all the detail. But this is what we need to consider, is that often one person in an organization takes the well-being lead. So they become a well-being lead in some way, maybe with the title, maybe with not. And they take that responsibility on, but they don't have everybody else on board. So they're trying to influence and support maybe many people. And that is tough. If you're doing it, if you've tried to do it, it's going to be really tough. So this is what we advocate, is that you have the strategy, that the directors are on board, literally supporting it, that you have training for leadership, you get teams that are actually experiencing maybe a small amount of training to have an understanding of what it even means. What do we mean by well-being? How do we support that? But then you have in-house individuals at all tiers within your organization that are known as wellbeing ambassadors. So, or, you can call them what you want, but this is the term that I use. Sometimes people call them champions. But the idea is that they're in-house representatives who have had extra further training to really kind of gain an understanding of some of the core principles behind boosting well-being at work. Okay, so that they are there to really role model. So they're not having to be suddenly standing up and doing talks or running training. They're just like, they're planted into the rest of the organization. They're working with people every day. And it's what they're talking about. What are they championing? What are they an ambassador of? And I hope what happens is, what you'll see is that they become an ambassador of the brand of well-being. Okay, so that they are talking about it naturally to people and they start to influence those around them. And that's how you start to create this whole organizational approach. And although that might sound like a lot, when you kind of put it together, you'll see that it actually starts to be really structured and quite straightforward approach to kind of create this system. The model I described to you is called the rest and rise model. And one of the key things around that is because I mentioned earlier the challenges of kind of sustaining change. So one of the things you need to think about when you're kind of introducing something new is you need to get individuals on board with it. Because if they're not, like once you're not sort of stood over them telling them to do it, they won't do it, as you know, with all things in the workplace. What you need is them to actually agree with it, believe in it, and be motivated by themselves to do it. So REST stands for making an intervention, making something that you want people to do relatable to them, so they actually understand why it's relevant, why is it important, how, in which way do they relate to it, like how does it fit with their values. You want to make it enjoyable, because if it's not enjoyable, people just, they won't do it. As you know, personally, I am sure. Ideally, you want to make it sociable in some way, because when we do things with other people that we enjoy spending time with, it makes us want to do it more, and it creates a sense of accountability. And then we also want to make it trackable. So we need to know that things are improving. So, if I started I decided I was going to start running 4 times a week, I would want to make sure that I had a connection to why that was important to me, really kind of fitted with my values. For me, it would be around health and fitness and kind of building my aerobic fitness. It's enjoyable. For me, it's about where I go running. So I'm very fortunate, I live in the mountains, and I can go, I don't just have to road run, which wouldn't work for me, but I can go out into beautiful spaces. That makes it enjoyable. Sociable, I'm due to meet a friend to go for that said run tomorrow at lunchtime. So because I made that commitment and it's sociable, it's making me more likely to go tomorrow than if I just said, oh, I'm going to go on my own. And then that trackable piece, I do wear an Apple Watch when I run, and so that kind of gives me my timings and how far I went, and that kind of tracking piece gives us a little boost. It's like a sense of accomplishment, and that piece makes us more motivated to do it again. And so what you'll see, if you drop one of those 4 things, your motivation will probably drop a little bit. And if you're thinking about introducing something supporting, an organizational intervention, if you can consider these 4 things, you will make it much more likely that people will engage and also sustain it. Okay, so that's the idea. So I'm putting that out there for you to consider and sort of have a play around with, and you might see how it works as we go through. The rise part of the rest and rise model is the concept of thriving. What is the outcome from that? And the outcome, when we see that people are thriving in a workplace, is we see increased resilience, we see increased innovation. They're like, because their well-being is better and their peak performance, we're looking at those 2 things to thrive. They are more creative, they're thinking of different ways to solve problems. They become more successful because they're more goal-focused. They're kind of relating to it, they're engaged in it. And that engagement piece is not just in an employee engagement terminology in the workplace often, but in a psychological sense. Engagement is a sense of experiencing flow. And flow is where we are in the moment, and we're so kind of balanced with our abilities and what we're being asked to do, that we get like in the zone. So people will experience in sport, but you could experience it, I don't know what your work is, but like creating a spreadsheet, or you could experience it talking to a client where you're just like in the flow. Everything's just happening, and it's like you're not even thinking. It's that good. And when we experience that space when we are well in ourselves and we've got this level of we're being pushed to the right level. So those are the kind of rest and rise principles that we keep at core in any of the training that we run, because it brings it together with this organizational approach. So the organizational outcomes that we're aiming for are building resilience, innovation, success, and engagement. And we're going to do that by sort of utilizing this, whole organization approach by getting a strategy, having leaders to role model and support, having teams having some knowledge, and then having these wellbeing ambassadors that are really kind of maintaining it, keeping it alive. And that's really the key piece, is that we want to keep it alive. And one of the ways to do that is to build intrinsic motivation. And we do that through the REST principles. So it might sound like a lot. I run a whole training piece on this, so I'm giving you the snapshot in 10 minutes, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight and maybe something to consider and play around with a bit. So part 2, this idea of success. We want your wellbeing strategy to include evidence-based tools. There is a lot of noise out there online, and some of that noise is good and some of it is evidence-based, but I definitely see a huge amount where it's, oh, this worked for me, why don't you try it? And that's great, try it, maybe it'll work for you, great. But personally, coming from sort of a research and science background, I want people to be trying tools, still experimenting with tools that have got peer-reviewed research, essentially. So there's not just one person tried it and it worked, but maybe one person tried it and then it got tried with a dozen other organizations, and then it was actually like research to question, was that just coincidence, or is there actually validity here? That doesn't mean it's going to work for 100% of people 100% of the time. Nothing in psychology is that clear cut, unfortunately. Life would be easier if it was. But we can at least start with that principle, that evidence base being behind it. So when I run training with wellbeing ambassadors and bring in this principle to kind of train people on a bigger scale within the organization, there are 4 key areas that I focus on. And with them, they bring lots of different tools and techniques that you can use and kind of play around with and work out what is most relevant to you, whether you've got teams who are remote, maybe your teams are active out in the field, maybe your teams are working one-to-one with clients, maybe they're completely computer-based and working from home and they don't see anybody most days of the week. It's about applying these tools into your situation. So first one, their character strengths. We do a lot of work looking at specifically what makes you who you are at your best. And there are different psychometrics that we can use around that. And depending on the organization, some people are already perhaps using a Gallup character strengths, or there's one known as StrengthScope, which I'm a practitioner of. We also use VIA. So there's a whole host of different ones. And they're different personality tests, which, some people are familiar with things like Myers-Briggs and various other insights and things. They do vary from that. And the reason is what they show us is a very unique pattern of a core character. So although a lot of the principles are, will show us 24 different universal human character strengths, things like humor and creativity and judgment and perseverance and bravery and zest for life. When it comes to me as an individual and you as an individual, your unique pattern of what makes you who you are will be different to somebody else. So for me, honesty and prudence and judgment, bravery are at the top of my character strengths. And I know that when I get an opportunity to use them, that's when I'm really thriving. That's when I'm really at my best. When I'm frustrated, I will often notice that something's like holding me back, whether it's because of me and I'm not using some of those strengths, or maybe I'm using them a bit too much or a bit too little. And it's such a powerful reflective tool to kind of progress and build that kind of resilience and also innovation and success. Then we focus on mindfulness practice. So a lot of people are familiar with mindfulness these days, but we actually bring it together into kind of a really practical kind of goal space, as well as traditional mindfulness practice. We combine it with character strengths and kind of really go into depth in that. Psychological capital, although a very sort of workplace and organizational term, Fred Luthens is the key researcher behind it. What it's looking at is key elements and the idea that when we have hope and we have confidence in ourselves and we have resilience, we have optimism around a goal that we're trying to achieve, we are much more likely to achieve it. And so that piece about kind of increasing success in an organization for an individual, there's sort of really useful tools that we can focus on around that. Then we explore positive emotions. Positive emotions are, they feel great, of course, but the research shows that they're also incredibly powerful to sort of take you that step further. I've just seen in the chat box, thanks, Matt, for turning up. Yes, I hope to see you at Capoeira later. And I think that leads in really nicely to this positive emotions, because it's a great example of doing something sociable, doing something that's good for my well-being, and so physical fitness, that it brings positive emotions. It makes me want to go back, right? So there's that kind of motivation piece, intrinsic motivation of why I might show up tonight. So yeah, see you there. See you there, Matt. Positive emotions, they give us the ability to think more broadly. So when we're getting stuck in a problem and kind of like, it almost feels like everything's closing in, or we're feeling that overwhelm or panic, if we can step out of that space and do something that will bring a positive emotion, whether it's doing something exercise-wise, whether it's just taking a step outside and listening to the birds, or doing a quick breathing exercise that might kind of just bring us back down and balance us, and then thinking about something positive, picking up your phone and looking at a photo that's going to make you laugh. Although they sound like really small things, the impact they have on our cognitive processes are really, really powerful. So there's a whole host of things that you can explore. When I run my training, this is an example of some of the ways that we could break those things down. So even just within character strengths, there are different specific interventions that can be used. So appreciating other people's strengths, for example, is a lovely one. Really starts to build teamwork as well when I do work with teams and sort of team performance. You can also kind of bring in different mindfulness meditation practices. So it doesn't have to just be you've got access to the Headspace app. Maybe that doesn't work for some people. Maybe there's other ways to bring it in. And as I said earlier, I can integrate things like strengths and mindfulness to create useful, practical tools that people can engage with. So there's just some ideas there. Some of you will be familiar with them, the gratitude boards, etc. There's lots of ways we can increase positivity. I want to do just one with you now, known as the 3 good things. Partly because it's one of my favorite interventions, but hopefully in this moment today, it might just give you a little bit of a boost of positivity for what else is going on for you. So the exercise is it's based on research. Again, Martin Seligman was sort of one of the key researchers that published this. It's been reviewed a lot since as well. And it's something that I've actually done every night for probably nearly 5 years. And it would be a rare thing for me to miss it. Even in tough times, it has literally become a habit that I do every evening. So the questions are, what one thing have you enjoyed? What one thing has gone well? And what one thing are you grateful for? And so my challenge to you today is, even though it's only 20 to 1 today, can you come up with 3 good things that have happened to you today? And perhaps share them in the chat box with me. They don't have to be big things. One of the things about wellbeing interventions is often those smaller interventions, they're not insignificant, but they're easy to do and quick to do. So it doesn't have to be big life things that you're grateful for. But one thing that I enjoyed today was we made apple pancakes last night for dinner, and there was some in the fridge left over. So I had that with yogurt and blueberries and some seeds and nuts on top for my breakfast, which felt like a real treat. So I enjoyed that today. That's my one enjoyed. What went well? Doing some final preparation for this this webinar this morning, so that I was ready to come and talk to you all. So I've done quite a lot of admin this morning. That's gone well for me. One thing I'm grateful for, my husband came and brought me a hot lemon this morning. I have water with hot lemon in the morning, and he came and brought it up to me before I even had to get out of bed. So I'm very grateful for that. So already today, there's been 3 good things that have happened. And the idea is that when we stop and notice those good things, we get a boost because we actually enjoy them in the moment. But if you do this exercise and reflect back, I'm reflecting back on something that happened previously, you can then experience it all over again. So I do this exercise. The idea is that you do it every night before going to sleep. You can do it writing it down, jotting it down on a bit of paper. You can also share it with people. So the way I do it is I share it with my husband. I'm very lucky. I've got someone to do that with. He's open to it. We turn to each other, and the last thing we do before going to sleep is we ask, what are your 3 good things? And regardless of what's going on in our life, however tough a day has been, even if we're not with each other, we'll send a text and it'll just very like practically be like, enjoyed, went well, grateful, and we share that. So it's something that when it's a habit, it's there for you even in those tough times. So overall, your day today, I hope it's not, but today might have been a really horrible day for you so far. I have no idea. I don't know what's going on for you. But within that, can you find those small things that you enjoyed? Even if it's just, I enjoyed my coffee this morning. Okay, well, Sarah said, enjoyed a banana muffin that she made last night. Fantastic. I love that you made that too, so well done. It's a great effort. Commute to work went well. I'm grateful for being in the office town so she can do some Christmas shopping on my way home. Lovely. You know, these are not huge things, but they're still things that are important to you and that we value. And just noticing them, sharing them can be really lovely. Lovely. Some more things coming through. Enjoyed morning coffee, went well in the commute, light traffic. What a blessing. Grateful for a workplace that affords me time to join webinars. Oh, great webinars like this one. Thank you, Darren. That's really kind. Yeah, so lots of things coming through here. And it's, I hope you're enjoying the exercise in itself, but you'll see that it's also a tool that it's easy to role model and share with people. You don't have to do it last thing before going to sleep. If that doesn't work for you, do it in the morning. Or if it works better, do it with a colleague at work, during the middle of the day when you're having a tough time. Some people I work with start integrating it into meetings. They don't force everyone to do it because there's nothing worse than being forced to come up with 3 good things, but they might share it and invite, anyone else to share. Maybe you just do 1 good thing because you don't have time, but 1 more than you would have had otherwise. And it can reframe everybody in that room. I'm learning things about all of you. Ross is saying nice steady run with his dog. Morning meeting with a client for New Year's events. We're getting an insight into what's going on for someone and what's important to them, what they value. And that in itself then builds connection, which is good for our well-being, particularly in a workplace. And if you're remote, it's an exercise you can do remotely. If you, maybe you use Slack or you're on Teams, you have like chat versions, or even just WhatsApp, 1 or 2 of your team or colleagues. So the top tips for kind of introducing different wellbeing tools, I'm saying avoid the latest craze. The latest craze might turn out to be the best evidence-based tool we've ever seen, but if there's not evidence behind it, it may be that just hang out and see where it goes before you kind of delve in. So that's kind of, if we can seek those tools that have got that kind of grounding in positive psychology research, and that's what my company does. That's kind of, I guess, our main focal point. I cannot urge you enough to try things yourself. Like, I'm telling you about that 3 good things as a particular exercise because I literally do it every day. And that's not meaning it's the best one to do and you have to do it, but I know that I'm genuine. Like, it is useful to me. I see the impact on a daily basis and the power of it, even when you've had a really tough day. So try them yourself, role model them. Maybe you don't like it, that's fine. Maybe someone else will. Yeah, maybe if you try it and you love it, it'll be a lot easier to tell other people about it. Vary the things that you introduce. If you're introducing different wellbeing interventions, give people options. Maybe introduce 1 thing 1 week, don't want to overwhelm people, but then there's something else another week, or each month you introduce a new concept or a new idea. Make it accessible, make it optional. Often you'll find that some people will be your, the type of person that wants to get in from the beginning. They're straight away open to stuff, and other people, they just need to hear about it for a while, and then they'll be open to it. So don't give up, I guess, is the message. I of course advocate, partly because this is one of the key things that I run for organizations, and I've seen the positive impact it can have, but consider this idea of having wellbeing ambassadors to promote the wellbeing interventions. It supports you. Even if you're in a small organization, having 1 or 2 other people that kind of understand this stuff, if they've perhaps done some training around it and have a knowledge, a general knowledge base and understanding why it's important, and then they're able to support you with that kind of, sharing of knowledge and keeping that maintenance going. Okay, and so that's that last piece, really, sustaining it. Initiating that change and creating a plan, really, a plan to maintain it. So I'm sure this might be quite, depending on how big your screen is, it must be really small. This is a model that I use when I'm training wellbeing ambassadors, and also in the Wellbeing Lead course I'm going to tell you about. We use it as a model to kind of work out what have you done already, what needs reviewing, what needs still to be done. I've also got a book coming out in the new year called the Wellbeing Ambassadors, and sort of how to support your people to create change. And it will include this map. And the reason I do that is because it can be easy to get lost or easy to get overwhelmed. And although there's a lot of detail there, you can see kind of the overall titles around. You want to have a wellbeing strategy, then you need to have wellbeing initiatives. You need to train your managers because you've got to get them on board. You need to give some level of tools or training to all your employees, okay, even if they don't engage with it all. You then want to kind of introduce the idea of having wellbeing ambassadors, whatever you might call them. You can change the name. Ideally, people have come to the training and there's going to be a few people who are like, oh, this is really good, I want more. And so they're your kind of key people that are like candidates for becoming wellbeing ambassadors. So you get them to apply for it, and it's kind of an application process. It can be a very informal application process, but getting that sense that it is a role they're stepping up for. They would have very specific training, which is, for many of them, that's like, added bonus. It's a privilege to get that extra training. And then they get ongoing support. So one of the key things I do with my clients is I offer sort of development groups. So we get the wellbeing ambassadors being trained to come together. And you, perhaps if you are a wellbeing lead, are that support person. So you are overseeing and sort of, governing the wellbeing initiatives, the things that might come through, but you've got a team of people that are supporting each other. And through that process, I'm able to give them updates from positive psychology and support with coaching if it's needed. So this is a very quick run through. But, in practice, what this has looked like, just to give you an example of a company I worked with, Matthew came to me because of a lot of the stuff I already talked about today. Staff overwhelmed. He was quite overwhelmed himself. He had some people working in offices and some people who were remote, so it was kind of hard to keep track of everybody. He cared a lot. He'd read a lot of self-help books. He had like a lot of knowledge, but he didn't really know where to go with it. And so because of that, he didn't have a wellbeing policy. They did a lot to support each other within the team, but he didn't really have a sort of formal policy. He didn't know, therefore, where to go next to move forward. He put on things that he thought were going to be really good, but people didn't attend them, which is always demoralizing, especially when they'd need them. So that was a trouble for him. And so therefore taking action felt a bit overwhelming because he was also pretty stretched with his actual role. He was the director of this company. So when you see that position, that particularly if you don't get that support from everybody else, so in his case, there were 2 other directors and not everybody was completely on board with it, wellbeing being essential. So he kind of felt there was some barriers to overcome too. And so I worked with his company for 6 months and we kind of went through this process that I've described to you. And it was really about starting at the beginning, saying, what have you got already? What's your company look like? What's the situation? And we developed a strategy. We then ran some training for the directors, but also then the next tier down, people who are in management level. And then ran it was optional, but training for all staff. So they had the option to kind of engage with some wellbeing and resilience training. And then we did the introducing wellbeing ambassadors so that they had much more 2-day in-depth training and then sort of follow-up support over that 6-month period. So when you kind of break it down and say, okay, where am I at? What do I need? It starts to kind of make a lot more sense. And so that's what I would invite you to consider today, kind of part of that strategy is what is your personal situation, your personal approach to this? Because only you really know what's going on in your organization, and only you perhaps know what's working and what's not, and what you would like to do. Like what would you like to achieve? So where are you at now? Just, maybe jot these down on a piece of paper for later. Perhaps not going to be able to answer all of these in depth in this session, but where are you at now? What would be your reasons for change? What's going to keep your motivation up? Because it's something that you have to keep that momentum for. So what are your reasons for creating change? Consider the barriers. What are the things that are going to hold you back? Now, you might put people on this list. There might be managers or people within an organization that you think, oh, that could be a barrier. Or it might just be your energy could be a barrier to this, right? Like, get it out there, though, because unless you do, you can't address it. And then that question of what's your readiness to move into action? Are you ready? Or are you just thinking about it? And when I have a coaching strategy call with people, these are some of the questions we look at, because we have to tease out where you personally are at if you're the one who's going to become the wellbeing lead. Because to know that then allows you to say, what next? How do I move forward? So when I help my clients, I do this process of coaching them. I will provide training for all their staff. The goal is to ultimately for them not to need me. So I provide these development groups and I train them in group coaching techniques so that they can become self-sufficient. And, my clients, have had some good experiences. There's one here, Mark Lovett, who was working in blind veterans at the time. I did a huge program, sort of this phased program where we started with the managers and we moved through. You can check out all my testimonials on LinkedIn, sort of information about various trainings I've done there, if you want to kind of know more about me. But hopefully you've got to know me a little bit in this webinar as well. So for sustaining change, we've got to recognize that we need maintenance. So I hope today I've highlighted that importance. If we don't have a policy or strategy, if we don't have a focus, that's when we get overwhelmed and we get lost and we have kind of like bitty things, and they're all really good, but no one really knows what they are and how they fit together, and people just go, oh, there'll probably be something else, and they don't engage in the same way. Sustaining change, you've got to get managers on board. Yeah, if they're not supporting and role modeling, you are going to struggle to create that long-term, literally cultural change, which is what we want to see. And part of that cultural piece is around creating this whole organizational approach. So that kind of goes back to my model, the Rest and Rise model, that sort of integrates and pulls everything together. And share evidence-based tools. You can do that straight away, even if you just shared the 3 good things with some of your team or your family, and see if some of them like it. Get them, challenge them, tell them, hey, I'm going to try it for 7 days. I'm going to do it every night before going to bed for 7 days. And if you think about the relatable, enjoyable, sociable, trackable, the sociable piece might not be you're doing it literally with someone, but you're telling them about it the next day and you say, oh yeah, I remember to do it last night, and you can kind of create that trackable piece. So consider how you might, just a snippet, take that one thing away. So role modeling is important, and looking after yourself. I cannot advocate that enough, that if you're going to look after other people, you need to look after yourself first. If you'd like to learn more about how we can support your leaders to proactively manage wellbeing and create a much more sustainable impact to reduce mental health problems, absenteeism, and improve retention, then get in touch. We offer a Wellbeing Ambassador program specifically designed for those who line manage, so that they can help their teams to truly thrive.